The Master of Arts in Ethical Leadership is a new kind of degree program that integrates personal awareness, professional proficiency, and global consciousness for people who are working across any kind of sector. This is what we call the gathering. It's a time for our students to come together, to meet with faculty, to interact with each other, to socialize a little bit, and to learn from a thought leader in the field of ethical leadership.
Our guest this evening at the gathering is Jerry Hirsch.
He's the founder of the Lodestar Foundation based in Phoenix, Arizona.
His gift is bringing groups together.
Ethical leadership is about finding creative ways of solving old problems. It's not the amount of money that he's giving, it's the way that he's using his money to make a difference in the world. Barron's magazine listed him as one of the top 25 most effective philanthropists in the world.
I just do my thing.
What's great about the gathering is we get to ask 5 questions of an incredible leader that we've identified. First was Matthew Mendrink, at that time of eBay. He talked to us not only about his work there, but also his nonprofit work with orphanages across the world. Julie Modorsky shared not only her professional journey, but her personal journey as well as a survivor of the Holocaust. And Dan Bain, CEO of Trader Joe's, came to us and spoke about the many ways that he's been able to bring his ethical integrity to the workplace.
I think these students are going to be surprised at how deep a thinker Jerry Hirsch is.
I've heard of him, but I'm here to learn more about him.
What I understand that he's going to be speaking about is entrepreneurship. I think I'd like to ask him how he got started.
My name is Jerry Hirsch. The main purpose of doing good is for yourself, is to give yourself a satisfying and meaningful life.
We're remarkably fortunate to have with us tonight Mr. Jerry Hirsch. So question number 1, what do you do and why does it matter?
I'm involved with philanthropy. I'd like to spend a moment, if it's okay with you, talking about my definition of what the word philanthropy is all about. I think you would be surprised if you looked at a dictionary and you found out the definition of philanthropy has nothing to do with money. Basically, a philanthropist is someone who loves mankind and takes some action towards that love. But there are many different types of philanthropists. Now, our foundation, one of the things we do is we support a group of adoption services in Phoenix, and I'm sure there's some in Los Angeles and other places that specialize in adoption of special needs kids, what they call kids that Down syndrome, cystic fibrosis, AIDS, and other problems of that nature. And I was fortunate to meet a couple who had walked into one of those agencies, and they decided they wanted to adopt a child that nobody else wanted to adopt. And they adopted a child that was 6 months old that had Down syndrome. And their goal was to be able to accomplish something for society, to do something for the community. To me, they're philanthropists. It doesn't matter whether you give money or you give service, you give of your heart and your emotions, like that couple who took care of that Down syndrome kid, or you give parts of your body. These are all philanthropists. You're developing as a model that other young people can follow. In that regard, to that extent, you're a philanthropist as well.
Let's go to question number 2. These are up here on the screen.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, look
Okay.
at that. Number 2, what is sacred to you?
Well, there's 2 things that are sacred to me. I thought about that as well. One is my reputation, but more specifically, my word.
Your word.
W-O-R-D,
Yeah.
my word. My commitment to do something or say something. And sometimes I've actually go overboard because sometimes I've made mistakes and I still need to carry out what I have to say. And sometimes I impose the same obligation on others who are not as strict with it as I am. But nevertheless, one of my areas that I will never compromise on is my reputation. And the second area is what I would call my legacy, which is really my family and my friends, and how they will continue to exist with what my relationship with them has been after I'm gone. Not only as individuals, as far as my family's concerned, but as a family in and of itself.
Number 3,
The best advice.
what's the best advice you've ever received?
Well, I thought about that too, and I will give you 2 pieces that you've given me, if that's okay. One piece of advice is what my father told me many times, and what he told me, and what I'm sure you guys have heard at some point also, is that the wisest person is the person who knows how much he doesn't know. And I have taken that much more broadly, and I think that one expression is probably the main thing that's responsible for whatever success I've had in my life. Whenever I do something, I always ask. I think the opportunity and the gift of listening is so important. In many areas where even if you think you know something, to go and ask to ratify it and to be sure of it so that you can add flesh and bones to what you think you may know. There's a sort of humility in continuing to ask. It's a very healthy humility. And I have learned so much in areas that I thought I knew just by inquiring, and it's gotten me to many, many successes. The other piece of advice, why I got into basic philanthropy. My parents were immigrants. They came to this country working in manual labor. My father started as a busboy. When I was 20 years old, they started my first business. And now I'm now 49 years old. I'm not really 49, but there's a story of 49. And I'm a very successful businessman. And all of a sudden, and I'm doing things in the community, but I'm also a workaholic. And I'm what they call a deal junkie. And I'm working 60 hours a week, and I'm all looking for the next deal and the next money. And what happens is, suddenly, my wife comes in and says, "I'm divorcing you," which I didn't expect. And I wound up in a very severe depression. And in my state of depression, no matter how good my business was, it didn't seem very much. I was, at that point in time, developing shopping centers with Kmart stores in that regard. And I wound up saying to myself, it really hit me in the middle of this hospital room, that when I die, they're going to put on the tombstone. Before Hirsch came, there were 700 Kmarts, and now there's 800 Kmarts. And I thought there must be something more than that. And all of a sudden, I got an epiphany. That moment was the very first time in my life I could tangibly believe that there was something else that was far more worthwhile to do than all the money in the world. And several people gave me this, that's also a very worn-out phrase. They said, "Jerry, stop and smell the roses." Well, I really thought about that, and I don't really, roses are okay. But what I thought I would do is, instead of stopping and smelling the roses, I would do that to people. When I was in my high-flying business, I had a very, very nasty habit. I would meet somebody, and in my head, I had 2 mental things: a file cabinet, and if I met that person in 5 minutes, I thought they would be useful at some point, I'd put them in the file cabinet, and if I didn't, I'd put them in the mental trash can. And that's how I lived the first part of my life. And what I learned was that each person is a very special person in its own right.
Number 4, when did an ethical decision cost you the most?
My belief is that if you make an ethical decision, ultimately it'll never cost you anything. And it'll ultimately benefit you. It may cost you in the short run, but you'll get it back at some point in time. It may be at some point in time that you may have to sacrifice. You may lose a deal that looks some shady. You may get fired for your job for doing things that you may not wish to do because they violate your code of ethics. Now, first of all, in the long run, I think if you follow the upstanding code of ethics, as I'll say later, you're not going to lose in any event. And what I'm going to tell you is going to sound weird, but this is actually what happened. One of my investors was a doctor who was also a very devout religious leader. And we're scheduled to close this transaction at 8 o'clock in the morning. At 6 o'clock that morning, I get a phone call from this doctor. He says, Jerry, I have to tell you something. Last night, I had a dream, and my dream was a voice from God. And I was told I cannot do this deal. Please. Well, you have a course in ethical leadership, so you decide, you take it back to your class and decide what you got to do. For me, this was my year. If I don't do this deal, I'm out. It was years wasted, all my dreams are gone. Well, so I said to him, okay, give me your money back. Well, I went to the closing. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, and the seller is there, and I said, I have to tell you something. I don't have all the money to close this transaction. I'll sign the papers on the second mortgage, but I don't have the money. I just can't do it. If not, you can wipe me away. Well, the guy looked at me like I was a total piece of dirt. Well, eventually he came back and very begrudgingly said I can do the second mortgage. And it wound up, as I told you before, you never go wrong when you make the right decision. It wound up immediately beneficial because we wound up having less owners to split the pie, because this guy's out. And it wound up to be probably the best investment that these rest of the partners ever made. And I still decide, I don't know what you all would have done. And I don't think these are ethical decisions. I think these are moral decisions. And if I had to do it again, I would do it again.
Number 5, what would you change in the world if you could?
One of my pet peeves is the West's compulsion to survive through consumerism. To me, it's something that's a sickness. 20 years ago, when I was bringing up my kids, we lived in a house that was about 2,200 square feet for 8 of us. Today, houses are 50% higher than that, and we buy new clothes every 6 months or in a year, and do this and do that. And there's no relationship between the physical things we buy and the time we spend paying for those things, where we could do alternative things. And I think this is one of the biggest things that corrupts our society.
It's no small thing.
So that's what I have to say.
No small thing.
Thank you.
Will you take some questions?
Sure.
All right.
Now that you've had a chance, what would you like your tombstone to say now?
Just a great comment. Whatever my tombstone might say, if I die tomorrow, I still feel that I got to do more. You're still looking for the next opportunity to do social good. You do have the satisfaction, but you don't have the complacency.
One of the things that I was interested in was understanding about the naming of your company.
I read the entire dictionary, so every word in the dictionary, literally. And the word Lodestar, those of you who haven't looked it up, is a generic word for North Star. It's a place for somebody to find their direction in life. And to that extent, it's perfect.
What do you think is the philanthropic health of this nation right now, both in terms of leadership and the common person?
You know, one of the wonders of philanthropy in this country is with the social media explosion, there have been dozens and dozens of new innovations and encouraging individuals and people to donate in various ways. I mean, one of the things that our foundation is very proud that we're the primary sponsor of, that maybe some of you have heard of, is, I don't know, does anybody here have heard of Giving Tuesday? Mm-hmm. They've gone the first year from 1,000 partners to 7,000 partners. They've increased giving by about $1 billion. And the mantra is to recognize that your mission is more important than your organization. Philanthropy has gotten a lot more notice. I've spent the last 15 years doing philanthropy, only not because I want to do good for anybody, but only because of my old selfish motives of having a satisfying, meaningful life. And it just so happens that the best way I know to have a meaningful life is to help people. And the more I help people, the more I have a meaningful life. You know the old Shakespeare saying, to thyself be true. If you're honest with yourself and you focus on why you're really doing something, I think you'll ultimately do a better job than trying to fool yourself or others.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
He tells the story. He inspires the students. He gives them a real-life example of someone who has made those kinds of ethical decisions. And you can see the faces of the students as they listen and as they think to themselves, I can do this.
Inspiring stories, interesting ways to tie into the whole concept of ethical leadership. The choices of speakers have really helped us see different ways in which a lot of the material that we're working on in courses relates to the world.
I think the university has a tremendous amount of potential to do a lot of good in a lot of ways. The main purpose of doing good is for yourself, is to give yourself a satisfying and meaningful life.
What do you think is the philanthropic health of this nation right now, both in terms of leadership and the common person?
I've spent the last 15 years doing philanthropy only, not because I want to do good for anybody, but only because of my old selfish motives of having a satisfying, meaningful life. And it just so happens that the best way I know to have a meaningful life is to help people. And the more I help people, the more I have a meaningful life. You know the old Shakespeare saying, to thyself be true. If you're honest with yourself and you focus on why you're really doing something, I think you'll ultimately do a better job than trying to fool yourself or others.
What I understand that he's going to be speaking about is entrepreneurship. I think I'd like to ask him how he got started.
Why I got into basic philanthropy. My parents were immigrants. They came to this country working in manual labor. My father started as a busboy. When I was 20 years old, they started my first business. And now I'm now 49 years old. I'm not really 49, but the story of 49. And all of a sudden, I got an epiphany. That moment was the very first time in my life I could tangibly believe that there was something else that was far more worthwhile to do than all the money in the world. It may be at some point in time that you may have to sacrifice. You may lose a deal that looks some shady. You may get fired for your job, for doing things that you may not wish to do because they violate your code of ethics. Now, first of all, in the long run, I think if you follow the upstanding code of ethics, you're not going to lose in any event. Whenever I do something, I always ask. I think the opportunity and the gift of listening is so important. In many areas where even if you think you know something, to go and ask to ratify it, to be sure of it, so that you can add flesh and bones to what you think you may know. There's a sort of humility in continuing to ask. It's a very healthy humility. And I have learned so much in areas that I thought I knew, just by inquiring, and it's gotten me to many, many successes.